Namaskar, very good afternoon to all present. On behalf of the faculty, the students, the governing body of the college, and on my own behalf, it is my pleasure to give a warm welcome to President Wesleyan University, Professor Michael Roth. And his esteemed team, comprising of the Vice President for Advancement, Professor Franz William, and Director of Engagement, Professor Cecilia McCall. This is a wonderful opportunity indeed, and I thank our Chairman, Governing Body, Mr. Prangachari sir, for having this all arranged for us, and a wonderful opportunity to exchange ideas, to build relationships, and to learn from each other as we all are working towards our pursuits for academic excellence. The presence of Professor Roth here reflects inclusivity and forward-thinking leadership in higher education. I have the distinct honor of introducing Professor Roth to all present here. Professor Michael Roth is the 16th president of Wesleyan University and has been in this role for 17 years, from 2007 onwards. A very well-known academic and university administrator, he has held notable positions before being in this university, including being the Hartley Burr Alexander Professor of Humanities at Scripps College and President of the California College of Arts. At Wesleyan University, Professor Roth has overseen the launch of several academic programs, such as the Alberton Center for the Study of Public Life and the Shapiro Center for Writing, as well as 5 new interdisciplinary colleges emphasizing advanced research and cohort building in the areas of the environment, film, East Asian studies, integrative sciences, and design and engineering. Under his leadership, Wesleyan had its most ambitious fundraising campaign in its history, raising more than $482 million, primarily for financial aid. He is an acclaimed author and has published 3 books with Yale Publishing House on liberal education, the most recent being The Student, A Short History. His book titled Beyond the University, Why Liberal Education Matters has been well appreciated by all stakeholders, particularly policymakers who have been working on the future of higher education in America. He continues to teach undergraduate courses at Wesleyan and through Coursera and the National Education Equity Foundation has offered online and hybrid classes. What a privilege to have you here, sir. Please join me in welcoming Professor Roth once again. Over to you, sir. Yeah, for the benefit of many who wanted to attend, we are doing a live streaming of your lecture, and this is through YouTube, so here's for a great time listening to Professor Roth.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm grateful for the warm welcome, and I look forward to hearing your questions. I think there'll be some slides projected. Let's see. But in any case, I'll start. I have a hard time standing still, so I'll try to speak up if I move away from the microphone because you have a portable microphone? Oh. If you do, that would be great. If not, I'll do my best to stay stationary. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you today about my most recent book, which is called "The Student: A Short History." Let's see. There we go. Excuse me. Very nice. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about this book, The Student: A Short History, which covers a lot of ground. It covers the history of education from the ancient world. Start off with Confucius, Socrates, and Jesus, and it ends in the present. So hold on, you need a seatbelt probably, because we go very fast. It's very bumpy, but it has. I do not talk about the tradition that you know so well. In other words, I do not talk about the traditions of education here in India, but I'll be very eager to hear your thoughts about whether the story I have to tell about the emergence of the idea of the modern student resonates with you. We'll see if the slides work. If not, I'll make it up as we go along, because the book isn't that old. I should remember what I said a few years ago. You're supposed to. I need some laughter from this row over here, especially. There we go. That's better. There we are. There you are. Okay. I needed a haircut, and I took that picture probably. What do you think? There we go. Oh, all right. So. I start with Confucius, as I said, Confucius, Socrates, and Jesus, and I talk about the way in which they set iconic patterns of what it means to be a teacher and to learn from a teacher. In the case of Confucius, I'm interested in the ways in which he asked his followers to follow a path, and that following a path wasn't exactly imitation of the teacher, but it was close to imitation. It was to find your way of walking in the master's shoes, in the path set out by the master. And I look at three of his students who had very different ways of following, because you can follow a master in very different kinds of ways. But all of Confucius's students were eager to be seen as a reflection of the as a master teacher, and this way of learning will become much less important as the modern idea of the student emerges in the 1700s. The person I talk about most in that opening chapter of the book is Socrates, and I look at three of Socrates' interlocutors. And what I'm interested in the case of Socrates, and this is an idea that liberal education holds on to very firmly, is the idea of critical thinking. You know, Socrates, if we were in a classroom, I'd say, what did Socrates know? Is this a question I can ask? What did Socrates know? Just that he knew nothing. Thank you very much. This is a friend of mine who came from New York with me. No. Thank you. So Socrates knew that he knew nothing, right? And what he was really good at was being annoying. Come on. It's a joke. So in other words, he was very good at showing that people didn't know what they seemed to think they knew. And so, there we go. From here I can do it. There we go. So in the case of Socrates, he knew that he didn't know much, but he was able, he was able to expose the ignorance of others. And in all seriousness, this to me became a vital part and remains a vital part of liberal arts education around the world. And my argument in this book and in the other books I've written about education is that it's overrated. That as students learn from very smart professors that people who are not at a university aren't so smart. It's just caused enormous problems in the United States. Right now, the United States is in an electoral season, and one of the things that everybody can agree upon is that elites are bad. And one of the reasons that elites are under such criticism is because the perception is that elites expose the ignorance of others in a way that makes most people feel bad. It makes them feel stupid. That's the point. Socrates loved making people feel stupid. And he loved to do it in front of an audience. And so, of course, he's put to death, as you know, or drinks the hemlock as a sentence of death. But the reasons given, a corruption of youth and all, were not right. But what was right is that he made the elites of his time, the business people of his time, the politicians, the people with some pretension, he made them look foolish. This is called, now we call this critical thinking. I look at Xenophon, Plato, and then the city of Athens as students of Socrates to show the way in which being a student came to be associated with being able to expose the ignorance of others. So here we have following a path, here we have exposing the ignorance of others, and in the case of Jesus, I'm interested in the ways in which Jesus just called for people to follow him. This is a different kind of teaching. This is a different way of being a student. I look at disciples or apostles, and I'm sure you have them here as we have them in the United States. That is, people who say, I'm going to follow her. I'm following that guy. And they attach themselves in ways that aim at imitation as the highest form of showing that you've learned something, that you act as if you were the master himself. So following a path, critical thinking, and imitation. I then talk about how in the pre-modern West, the idea of the student emerges. And I mostly focus on the Middle Ages in Western Europe. And in a nutshell, there are three elements of being a student before there are schools to go to. The first is that you're supposed to learn enough to become independent of your parents. What it meant to be in the process of learning was that you were acquiring the skills so that you could go and start your own household. You can get married. You can not be dependent on your parents. And that notion of autonomy from your original family is very important for the idea of the student. What you learn as a student is not to be dependent on the people who raised you. And alongside that idea is the idea of integration. And I think it's in tension with the first one. The first one is learning to be independent. Integration means learning to be part of a community. So in the pre-modern West, as you learn to leave your parents' home, as you learn to strike out on your own and set up your own household, you also are learning to be part of a village. You're learning to be part of a town. You're learning to be part of a community. So you have autonomy, but you also have integration. And this is without schools usually. There's very few schools are available. And so this is the before there are schools, there is an idea of learners or students who acquire independence and the capacity to participate in a community. It might mean going to church. It may mean helping with common endeavors like harvesting a crop, like helping those who are suffering. All of these things one is supposed to learn by the time one's in one's teenage years. I then look at this other mode that's probably familiar to most of you of being a student that without quite being enrolled in a school, and that's being an apprentice. So I spent some time in the book talking about how training in a trade was an alternative to schooling, but training in a trade meant that you you give up your freedom to the master, to the person who is teaching you how to become a carpenter or a hat maker or a candle maker. And as an apprentice, you are acquiring certain very specific skills. You're not like Socrates learning to expose the ignorance of others. You're not following the path. You're learning very specific skills in order to become a master of your trade, in order to show your competence as a candle maker or a cabinet maker or what have you. You go from being a boy to being a man by having skills. Since that's familiar to most people, I spent a little time on the female apprentices, because most of the literature about apprenticeships are about boys becoming men, but there's some very interesting studies of women or girl apprentices and the women who become their teachers or their masters in early modern Europe. Because I was a student of Michel Foucault when I was in graduate school, and my first writings were about French philosophy, and so I always thought, learning from Foucault, that in order to understand something, you should understand when it fails or its opposite. And so I look at these failed apprentices, two very famous ones in the West, Ben Franklin, one of the United States' founding fathers, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And in both cases, these are guys who were very talented, brilliant in so obvious ways, but they were terrible apprentices. Franklin was apprenticed to his brother. And as he says in his very, very American, funny way, he says, my brother was cruel. He beat me more than was necessary, he says. And Franklin, he really hated being subservient. And if you're an apprentice, by definition, you're subservient. So he was apprenticed to his brother who had a newspaper. And so Franklin started writing articles for the newspaper, but didn't sign them with his own name. In fact, he signed them with a woman's name. And he did this for quite some time, and these articles became very popular, which of course angered his brother greatly, because his brother didn't like the idea that someone else was getting attention. So Franklin kept getting in trouble with his master, who was his older brother, but finally his brother got arrested for treasonous activity against the British, this is in the colonial period, and in order to get his brother out of jail, they have to say his brother will no longer be running the paper, that Ben will run the paper. But this was not true. They just did that to get him out of jail. But Franklin knew that this was his ticket to freedom. He was supposed to stay subservient to his brother, but instead he ran off to Philadelphia, started his own newspaper, started his own fire company, started his own university, started a whole range of activities that made him one of the great intellectuals in the United States in the 1700s. Rousseau, too, was apprenticed to a nasty guy who beat him all the time. But in Rousseau had an opposite reaction to being tyrannized by a master. What Rousseau did was to just take it as the most important thing he could learn. And I'm sure you've known students like this, not here at Hindu College, but elsewhere in your lives. You have known students whose greatest joy was to do something bad to the teacher, right? You've met these people, right? They're not here, but you know that they just love to play a prank on the teacher or play a prank on some school official. And Rousseau, since he was supposed to learn to be an engraver, and he would have been interested in being an engraver, but what he really wanted to learn was how to get the master in trouble, how to do things to hurt him. And this becomes an important part of Rousseau's political philosophy, because he realizes later that his own desires as Jean-Jacques Rousseau were formed by his antagonism to the master. He didn't really, he talks about stealing things from his master that he didn't really want. He just liked to steal them because he knew it would anger the master. So he started behaving in all kinds of ways that were counter to his own nature, Rousseau would go on to say. And Rousseau, one day, was coming home to Geneva. He's been walking in the woods, his afternoon off, and he gets back too late, and the gates are locked. And he knows if he gets back to the place of work and where he would live, that he's going to be punished severely. So he just takes off. And for Rousseau, that escape from tyranny was the deepest lesson of being an apprentice. What did Rousseau learn? That you need to be free in order to really learn. That if you're oppressed and you learn in the condition of oppression, everything you learn will be perverted. And this is such a vital message of the Enlightenment and the Revolutionary period in the 1700s, that if you learn in a system that's oppressive, everything you learn will be perverted. You may be doing well, but everything you learn is going to be twisted in ways by the oppressive system so that it feels like knowledge, but it actually is distorting who you are. And so buried within Rousseau's kind of almost comical discussion of his youth, buried in there is a philosophy of freedom. You know, if you've studied political philosophy in the West, you probably know one sentence of Rousseau's, which is, men are born free and are everywhere in chains. And so for Rousseau, what you learn in school, and this will be true for Foucault centuries later, what you learn in school is to be unfree. And what you need to learn is how to be free. That notion that learning is tied to freedom is, I argue in this book, at the core of the modern notion of freedom. At the modern notion of the student. At the core of the modern notion of the student is a concept of freedom, best articulated, I think, by Immanuel Kant, a great fan of Rousseau's, very different temperament, but Kant very much adored Rousseau's notions of freedom and autonomy. And he said in an essay called What is Enlightenment, that I teach all the time, that enlightenment is a man's emergence from self-incurred immaturity. What does that mean in our terms? Enlightenment, learning, is learning no longer to be a child. Not to be addicted to your phones, for example, as I see is so prevalent here, as it is in my university. And not to have to always be dependent on someone else's input or someone else's advertising. What Kant is saying is that we should learn not to be children, not to be immature. And we learn that, he draws on the Socratic tradition, we learn that through criticism and standing on our own feet intellectually. So I argue in this book that in the 1770s, the idea of the student gets wedded to the nascent idea of political freedom, which in Kant is no longer to be a child. That idea in the 1800s all over the West gets integrated into colleges, high schools, even the lower grades, that the point of learning is not to be able to repeat what the teacher says. The point of learning is to be able to teach, is to be able to think for yourself in the company of others. One of the most romantic expressions of this comes from the great American philosopher, writer, Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he says this about not about Hindu college, but about higher education in general. Higher education should ignite students' spirit and intelligence with the materials from nature and from the past. Not merely show students how to digest these materials. Colleges can only highly serve us, Emerson wrote in the middle of the 1800s, when they aim not to drill, but to create. Not to just get you to do well in a test, but how to create. When colleges do well, when they gather from far every ray of various genius to their hospitable halls, and By their concentrated fires, colleges should set the hearts of their youth aflame. I mean, that's what you want in a classroom, rather if you're a professor, you want to see the hearts aflame of your students. If you're a student, you don't want to just know you're going to be prepared for an exam. You want to feel yourself learning in a way that creates enthusiasm, creates passion. That is the ideal of liberal education in the modern period, in the post-Enlightenment period. And I talk about that ideal in relation to a couple of key figures in American intellectual history, Jane Addams and W.E.B. Du Bois. We could talk about them if you're interested in it. Du Bois, a great black intellectual in the United States who is discriminated against from day one. He grows up in a little tiny town in New England called Great Barrington. He's the only black kid around. He's a genius. He gets sent to great schools, but every school he goes to, he is one of the few black people around, and he is systematically discriminated against until he gets to Germany, where in Germany, where he goes as a graduate student, he feels free. And freedom for him means the freedom to learn. Jane Addams, she as a woman hoping to get a quality education, is also discriminated against. She finds that she can't pursue an education as a woman because of the barriers to female education in the beginning of the 1900s. She overcomes those barriers and sees education not just as something that happens in the classroom, but something that engages with the major issues of society. She sets up programs for immigrants and for the poor, and she becomes a pragmatist arguing for the benefits of liberal education that takes you out of the classroom and into the street. I know that in India, there are these extraordinarily ambitious plans to build on the economic progress of the last decades. And as you move towards the celebration of the centennial, that these groups like the poor, women, farmers, and youth, the groups that the government has called out as having been marginalized from higher education, can these groups use liberal education to overcome systems that have been oppressive, that have marginalized them? Can these groups use liberal education as Du Bois did and Jane Addams did to create more freedom for themselves and for other citizens? This is an enormous issue in a society like yours that's undergoing such rapid economic and political change. In a society undergoing rapid economic change, how the distribution of the benefits of those changes will get, that question will become increasingly urgent. I do believe, as someone who's a professor in a liberal arts institution, that a liberal education helps groups, no matter how marginalized, find ways to practice freedom. Practicing freedom here in Delhi is going to be different than practicing freedom in the Middle West in the United States or in Central Africa. It's going to be different in every ecosystem that you could be in, every cultural system. But I do believe that liberal education is flexible enough to give students and their teachers the opportunity to practice freedom in a way that can benefit any of these groups, all of these groups. We in the United States have a long history of picking on students. I don't know if you have this in India. You can tell me after. In other words, old people like me like to complain about students. When I was growing up, there was all this talk about the generation gap, that students and parents couldn't talk to each other. In the 1990s, this became political correctness. And today, you may hear this. I don't know how prevalent this talk is in India, but the complaints about woke culture, is this something you hear about? Right? So it's the easiest thing to do. It's like shooting fish in a barrel, is an American expression. You know, that you just complain about woke culture, everybody thinks you know something. Just like political correctness in the 90s or generation gap. I think that this is the complaint of a generation that feels that young people are learning in ways that the older generation did not have access to. And so my question for you, I don't have an answer to this, is youth culture in India today a culture that is ready to accept challenges of liberal education. Because if you have a liberal education, you do need to have some trust in the system. You need to have some notions of legitimacy. You can't, I don't think, have a liberal education that just ends in cynicism or nihilism. Liberal education should be constructive and not just critical. How to use liberal education to create bonds of community, to create engagement with others, and not just a feeling of being smarter than your neighbor. That notion that an educated class should become more insular or more concerned only with its own affairs, that will kill education. In America today, higher education is under enormous duress because many Americans feel that people in great schools like yours are too privileged, and that people in great schools look down on ordinary people. The beauty of the ideal of liberal education is actually it's democratic. Anybody could participate in it. It shouldn't create feelings of superiority and a status of elitism. It should be open-ended enough to allow anyone from any walk of life to engage in practicing freedom. So, to conclude, I think that what we need today in education is a combination of those iconic teachers' techniques that I started with. The Confucian technique of following a path. We do need to learn skills. We do need to learn crafts. We can't just start from some logical or abstract principles. We need to practice crafts like Confucius always recommended to those who followed the master. We do need Socratic critical questioning. Lord knows that there's a lot of disinformation out there. There's a lot of propaganda out there. We need the kind of critical questioning that will separate propaganda from philosophy, that will separate a truth-telling from misinformation. And I do think that emulation of the kind practiced in Christianity, the kind that Jesus recommended, that emulation is a sister concept to empathy. We need people who are able not just to be critical and not just to learn skills. We need people who are able to see themselves in the shoes of another. We need people through their education who are able to imagine the lives of others. And that leads to students practicing freedom. Practicing freedom in a way that allows them to leave behind being a kid, leave behind immaturity, in Kant's old phrase. What we want from liberal education, I think, is to learn how to think for ourselves in the company of others. In this transformation that India is undergoing, it's like a radical experiment. You don't know what the future is going to bring. You all are well aware of the problems that the country is facing. But you also, I think, are well aware of the extraordinary capacity that you can bring to deal with these problems. Through a combination of skill building, following a path, critical thinking, Socratic intellectual conversation, and empathy, seeing yourselves in the shoes of others. I think there's so much you can do as educated young people and their teachers to make a contribution to this country at a vital time in its history. It would be a terrible mistake, in my view, to go back to narrow skill building, to just emphasizing tests, to neglect the freedom that comes with practicing new kinds of things. I have great hope for liberal education in the United States, and having just had a brief visit here with you today at Hindu College, I'm inspired that what the future of liberal education in India might be. Thank you very much. So I think there's time for questions. If there's a question, raise your hand.
Thank you, Professor Roth. It was a very engaging talk. And now I open the house for some questions. Yeah, I can see.
Good afternoon, teachers. Good afternoon, sir. So you talked about freedom through education, like how learning, higher education could lead to a freedom, lead to autonomy, anatomy of like a person, independence. But does liberal arts have a place for creative aspects such as writing, acting, music, and such, places? Because even though you talk about freedom, even in today's society, writing, such as these aspects of life are very frowned upon by parents or even mocked by the teachers. I have heard of cases for people who have PTSD and trauma from their parents or their grandparents mocking them for these arts. Do you think there should be measures for these aspects as well?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I thank you for that question. It's so important. I'm used to. Do you think I should sit down? No, because I'll be. I think that that the arts are a core part of liberal learning, and in the United States, the performing arts and the visual arts have been part of a liberal education since the 1920s, really, in many places, and at Wesleyan. Well, just last night we had a reception for some alumni here in Delhi. And the woman who was graduated just a few years ago from Wesleyan, who's from Delhi, she majored in computer science and theater. And she thinks nothing's weird about that. That she learned things in theater that she uses now in the business world. Of course, she learned things in computer science that helped her become better at directing shows. That these modalities of engaging with the world can be mutually reinforcing. And the isolation of the arts from the humanities and the sciences is a terrible mistake. It only serves bureaucrats. We find when I say serves bureaucrats, I mean it makes it easier for people like me to manage a school. You have, the people, you stay in that lane, you stay in this lane, you stay in, but that's not how learning works. What I find so interesting in colleges and universities are people who get very good at something, let's say mathematics, and they also have a passion for, as one of my students did, orchestrating musicals. And so, a person who's studying religion is also doing painting. Obviously, there's a great history of this, right? So I think that the isolation of disciplines from one another is a terrible mistake because it prevents the synergies from being fully actualized. I just had a very brief tour of your interdisciplinary building, the interdisciplinary labs that you're forming here on campus. And that's a great example where you want to have science and policy. You want to have material science and product design. I mean, things that come together in ways that will be practically efficacious. And when parents, of course, parents will always say, but you should do engineering, right? That's what they say in India. You should do engineering. You should do engineering. But you should tell them that President Roth, they'll be impressed because I'm the president. You say, President Roth reminded us that 10 years ago, parents were telling students, you have to learn to code. 15 years ago in my school, parents were saying, you should learn how to do accounting. Accounting is going away. AI will do that for us. Nobody's telling us to learn to code like they did before. These are useless, those skills that we wanted to require are almost useless. What's not useless is learning to learn. And if you're performing in a play or in a musical, or we have a great film school at Wesleyan, and I just walked by the film school the other day, there was a course on film and data science. Because, of course, streaming is all about algorithms. Algorithms have to intersect with creativity. You get the picture. So I think that in a liberal arts environment, you should include the sciences, you should include the arts, that the more inclusive you can be, the better the chances you'll find something surprising and productive.
That's true. Next question. Yeah, I can see the student raising the hand there. Mike, please. Okay?
And first of all, sir, I would like to commend for this exceptional presentation. And my name is Avinash, and on behalf of Hindu College, I welcome you to India.
Thank you.
And there is a very simple understanding that I want to conceive. So since we are talking about liberal education, throughout the world, we see that the development of liberal education developed somewhere in the 19th century during the medieval period. So, sir, the conceptualization of liberal education has been put aloof the world back in ancient period by India only. When we talk about the concept of gurukuls, dhams, and all these scenarios. So, sir, it's a two-part question. How particularly the University of Wesleyan is working with the conceptualization of, not quite.
It's read it. Avinash, it's needed because it's getting recorded and there is a live telecast also. So kindly speak on the mic.
All right. So, how the conceptualization of liberal art has been kept in the podium of the world from the aspect of your university, and how in this globalized world we can uphold the idea of liberal education, considering from India there has been a huge exports of great minds to US as well. So, sir, how the university is working on those regards?
That's great. Thank you so much. So I think that it's great. It's a great question. I was at the Jaipur Literary Festival almost 10 years ago now, and I wrote this book called Beyond the University, Why Liberal Education Matters, and my co-panelist said, you're trying to get all these wonderful students from India to come to the United States. That's neo-colonialism. I said, and there were thousands of people there going, yeah, it's neo-colonialism. So I was like, no, I don't. You know. And that's true. There is a way in which I'm delighted to have students from India come to Wesleyan, and they come to the United States in large numbers. And we actually hope they go back to India and make a positive contribution to the society here. We would like to get more of our students to come here and do work here in India and learn from what's happening here. And that speaks to the first part of your question, which is that cosmopolitanism is such a compatible concept with liberal education. You know, liberal arts education, as it was conceived in Greece and then especially in the 1900s in Europe, liberal arts education was really a checklist. You should take some Greek, you should have some religion, you should have philosophy, you should have mathematics. You checked the box, and then you showed you're a gentleman, you know, you're an aristocrat. That's not what I'm talking about. I hope it's clear. The American tradition of liberal education is pragmatic. We want you to learn a lot of stuff because we think it's useful. The European tradition was, no, you should learn a lot of stuff because you don't have to work, and you could show that you learn a lot of stuff. The American tradition is very much put it to work. And when you put things to work, this is like your question about the arts, the more ingredients you can put to work, the more likely it is that you will make a discovery. And so I'm woefully ignorant about traditions in India. So I'm sure there's someone who here studies the history of liberal education and can integrate that more with the history of traditions in India. And to me, that would be most welcome. Because I think the more cosmopolitan is the word I'll use, you can be, the more likely the combinations you create will be productive. But cosmopolitanism can't just be that the richest country in the world sucks up all the talent and brings it to itself. Although people have pointed out to me that Indian people are running the United States now, so maybe, I don't know, all the big companies but I think the great promise of liberal education is in combination. The threat against it is in homogeneity. So if America exports its culture so everybody's acting like Americans, it's a disaster for many reasons. But if we can play a role in bringing people together so they authentically listen to each other and learn from a variety of traditions, that seems to me a very positive outcome.
Okay, thank you. We can take a few more questions. Yeah.
Hello, sir. It's a very wonderful session. And myself, Rohit Singh from Sociology Department. My question is about...
There you are. Sorry, I just couldn't find you.
Oh, so sorry, sir. My question is about when we talk about liberal education, somewhere we feel it is connected with a holistic kind of understanding of education. So if we connected it with a very holistic kind of understanding, and then we think about Western education and tradition of Western education, how spread it, it mainly focus upon specification of any subject, so that we can see that in science we have different specifications of sciences or different specification of subjects or disciplines. So in that terms, how we executed this liberal kind of understanding of education, which is very holistic in nature, and that different classification kind of subjects and disciplines which we study in current scenarios in universities.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank
sir.
you so much. It's a great question. From a sociologist, you know, it makes sense that the sociology of education is a story of specialization and the formation of disciplines that then police their own borders. You know, so if you're I have a PhD in history, and so I'm supposed to talk like a historian, but I want to be able to learn from philosophers and biologists and anyone whose work might have an impact on the things the problems with which I'm grappling. But you're right that the history of education from the time of the modern university is one of enhanced specialization, because in Western culture, and maybe this is not dissimilar from how things are today in India, status comes through specialization, right? In the introduction, the very generous introduction I was given today, I said I was the Hartley Burr Professor of Humanities. I loved that job because I could teach in any department in the university. The departments didn't like me coming over and saying, well, I'm teaching, I didn't try to teach math or something I don't know anything about, but I could teach in history, I could teach in literature, I could teach in sociology or philosophy, depending on the kind of theme I wanted to examine. And that seemed to me almost utopian. You do push back against structures of specialization that, of course, do in some ways deepen knowledge. In other words, you don't want to put me in a chemistry lab and pretend that I know what I'm doing. I won't learn, no one will learn anything. I think you do need, that's where that first path of following a path, learning a skill, practicing a craft, I think it's really important. It's just not the only thing that's important. So one of the things about Wesleyan, and it's been true of Wesleyan since the 1950s, before the word interdisciplinary was really used a great deal, Wesleyan had a culture where people in psychology and music and history and classics were all interacting together. They knew their own world. I mean, John Cage knew something about composing music, but he was hanging out with Karl Schursky, who knew something about the history of Vienna, or Norman O'Brien, who was a classicist who was writing utopian nonfiction in the 1950s. And I think that kind of joyful eclecticism can be extremely powerful. It can actually also be dilettantism, right? It can lead people to do bad work. You know, you try your hand at poetry, you may not be a very good poet. You spend your lifetime becoming a better poet, you're a great poet. And so I don't want to sound like I'm condemning of deep knowledge. I just think that deep knowledge in a college or university setting is really compatible with cross-fertilization. And that cross-fertilization is something that the university structures have prevented us from fully realizing. But I think with interdisciplinary centers like the one you have here, and we started these interdisciplinary colleges, that cross-fertilization can really, the proof is in the pudding. You can see the effects it has, and I think that they are powerful and they can be transformative.
Okay, thank you. So we have one of our faculty members, Dr. Chandrachu, raising his hand, a political science man.
Hi, Professor Roth. Welcome here.
Thank you.
I stand in between my younger colleagues and not so younger colleagues. And my question to you is not in the capacity of you as an academic alone, but more so as the head of an institution, because you seem to be an advocate of liberal education, but the fact of the matter is we grew up learning our lessons in watertight compartments. And as we end up higher in our careers, we also tend to be living in silos, in different silos, sorry. Now, how do you as an administrator help yourself and your colleagues expand their horizons to include the others? Because traditionally, in this country particularly, those who did science were supposed to be the great men and women, and those who didn't were useless. So how do you accommodate and how do you allow them to come in, given the fact that, remember, science only tells what is. The need of the hour is also to expand the horizon to tell you what ought to be, what should we be. So I think you as an administrator should tell us how do academics accommodate each other in that cosmopolitan frame that you've been talking about.
Thank you. It's a great question. Yeah. Thank you. So, I grew up at Wesleyan as a student, and so I had this ethos given to me. My parents didn't go to college. I didn't know anything about colleges, so I thought this is what colleges were like. And as you point out, they're not like that typically. The science is here, the humanities are here, the arts are here, and they don't talk to each other very often, typically. But at Wesleyan, in the 70s when I was there, it was not like that at all, and I was able to make up my own major, and I was able to draw on lots of different disciplines. When I got to graduate school, my professor at Princeton, which was not like that, Princeton, but he knew Wesleyan well, and he said to me, "You've got to go and learn more stuff because you've had a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but you don't know anything, Roth," he said. Very nice guy. And so I did, but I loved that. I loved going to different departments and sitting in on those classes. When I became the president of Wesleyan, I announced to the faculty straight away, in kind of a dumb fashion, in retrospect, I announced to them if I could get rid of all the departments, I would. Because I just think they're bureaucratic conveniences, but they have detrimental effects on undergraduate education in particular. We're mostly undergraduate school. And a chemist stood up, Stu Novak, great researcher and teacher, he stood up and said, "You don't have the power. We need departments." So we all laughed. So what can I do as an administrator? I could put money in places that are anti-departmental. So since my 18th year, I've raised a lot of money, and I put the money, I say, here's the department, here's the department, here's the department. I put the money over there. And guess what happens? People start going over there. Not everybody. The guy who's stuck in his silo stays in his silo. Good. And he's not getting any extra funding. I don't have enough power. I can't fire him. But the action's over here. So I'll give you a concrete example. In my first or second year, a biologist came to see me. He had a vision for environmental science. He's a biologist. He has a fish named after him, Barry Chernoff. And he does a lot of field work. But his vision was that you get people from the arts, the sciences, the humanities, in think tank mode, attacking a problem together, not knowing what the results will be. Sometimes it won't work. Sometimes it'll be spectacular. We need spectacular things to deal with climate change and the environmental issues we have. So we set up a college of the environment. Some of the old-fashioned faculty members, like people of my age and older, they said, that's not real, it's not real. I said, yeah, but look, they have grants, they have internships, they have extra faculty, they have small classes, and the people who can't do that work or are afraid of collaboration, they stay in their silos, and then the other people go there. That's why we have now 6 new colleges like this, in education studies, in integrated science, because even in the sciences, of course, in the sciences, problems don't just stay in a discipline. We have a new college of design and engineering. We have physicists and chemists and engineers and architects, artists, and designers. And that's where the money goes. Of course, there's been a backlash. There are some faculty who say, you're destroying the old departments. I say, duh. That's what I'd like to do. But we do need people to learn skills. You need to learn organic chemistry if you're going to do the kind of work that you want to do in medicine or in biology. You need to learn, I'm a historian, I believe people need to learn the dates and the chronology and the context, but that's not all they need to learn. And the way I can make that happen as an administrator is by finding money to reinforce that among the faculty, because I don't know enough to do these things myself, but I can raise money to make it happen. And I think that has been, for us, a ticket for real innovation.
Thank you, Professor, for giving us that secret and the tips. Thank you. One last crisp. Yeah, Mike, please. Mike.
So this is really a great way of, telling us how we can get into the mode of liberal education, even whichever may be our parent sort of discipline. And you'll be very happy to know that our governing body, our management, and some of us have started, in fact, have taken a few steps in this direction and are coming up with such courses. We are not in a position to do centers or schools or whatever, but definitely our first initial steps that we would like to take are on courses, which interdisciplinary and out-of-the-box courses is
Yes.
what we are looking at. And a large number of teachers from various disciplines, different sciences and social sciences, have already put in their minds to come up with proposals that can be sent to the government for funding, etc. So I'm very happy to feel that yes, our direction is good and shall definitely bear fruits.
That's great.
Thank you. Do we have the time to take one more shot and a very crisp question? The last question, I can see a boy raising hand there. Wait.
Just a second, sir. So good morning, sir. I am also from history, and my question is, it's like a bit long, but I'll try to make it crisp. So the crux of my question is that, the present time that we are living in, I think it's the best for liberal education to actually be facilitated with agencies such as internet that are on our hands. But at the same time, these same agencies make me question whether this liberal education is actually being liberal and free. To what extent? Because, like you also talked about the woke culture thing, I have noticed students tend to follow the bandwagon effect. Like you are from Mr. So let me give you an example. Every other student that I talk to here, or anywhere in the university or anywhere in the nation, tends to say that, oh, I have read Das Kapital, I have read Karl Marx thoughts, and I am the greatest person that you are talking to. They all quote Morris Dobb and Perry Anderson in every second sentence that they say. So I think that this liberal education, the facilities that are there now, they are creating chauffeur's knowledge rather than actually letting students articulate their thoughts and gaining actual knowledge. So how can we overcome this disparity that exists between the idea of the liberal education that we talk about and the agencies that are there to facilitate it?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good question, and it's a hard one. I think that in the United States, I want to choose my words carefully. We're in this election season. In a couple of weeks, there's going to be election, and some candidates have actually promised to dismantle universities because they're not just liberal education in the sense that I've described it. They think they're politically on the left, and I think some of that is just kind of scapegoating of an enemy to generate enthusiasm or solidarity. The part of it that I do worry about in liberal education is the tendency, I'm not sure if this is what you meant by the quoting of Marx and others, but the tendency of some to isolate the educated from the rest of the population. Liberal education sometimes gives people a sense of their own superiority. And it should do the opposite. The one thing if you actually take this cosmopolitan, open-ended view, is that you're never going to know enough to feel that much smarter than other people. There's always someone out there who knows things that you can learn from. That intellectual humility seems to me such a big part of liberal education. You can go the other way, and I've written books that are extremely hard to understand if you're a normal person because they're written, I wrote on French philosophy and philosophy of history for years, and I understand them. I think I was speaking to a few people, a very few people, who were interested in those issues of philosophy in France in the 20th century. I think it's so important that we be able to speak that way, and that we can speak in another register to people who don't have the same jargon, who don't have the same methodologies. And so I guess it's a long way of saying that although it is a danger in any advanced education, that those people who are lucky enough to receive a great education isolate themselves from the rest of the population. But it is not necessary. My great teacher was Richard Rorty. Dick Rorty was one of the smartest people I've ever met, and he could talk to everyone about philosophy. He could talk in very technical terms about philosophy, and he could talk in very open, democratic ways about it. And for me, that is a model of how to present education in such a way that it enhances democracy, not undermines democracy.
Thank you so much. I think we can take the questions later on because we are running short of time. So thank you, Professor Roth. Your lecture was absolutely engaging, I must say, and all of us sitting here enjoyed it thoroughly. In fact, it's a delight listening to you and interacting with you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
On behalf of the management, students, and staff, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Team Wesleyan University, led by Professor Roth. We have Mr. Michael, Ms. Cecilia McCall, for taking out time from their hectic schedule and be here to interact with the faculty and students of Hindu College. I express my thanks to our chairman, sir, Sri Rangachari, sir, for his gracious presence, guidance, and support. It is because of sir that Wesleyan University is today interacting with us. Thank you, sir. I also express my heartfelt gratitude to Ashok Mittal, sir, who has always been very supportive for all such ventures which the college gets into. Thank you, sir. And yes, a big thanks to the principal for having believed in us and leading this team Hindu for the Wesleyan University interaction. A big thanks to all my colleagues from Hindu College for their presence and participation, because they have been working on, the ideas of mutual interest, which can be the areas of potential collaboration. And I'm hopeful, not hopeful, but confident that we are going to cleanse some of them for our future collaborations. And last but not the least, I'm thankful to all the students who have been a disciplined, participating audience for this program. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. Now I request our principal to kindly felicitate the guests. And then we have a quick group photograph. And immediately after the group photograph, we'll have an interactive session. The Wesleyan University delegates will interact with the faculty members for exchange of ideas.
I think we'll come down.
Students, we are having a group photograph. Please wait. Please wait for the group photograph. यहाँ पे ये बंद कर दो ना, ये बंद कर दो, इससे पिक्चर ठीक नहीं आ रही. I request everybody to please come forward for a group photograph. सभी आ जाएं. क्या ऐसे लेंगे? ठीक है, ले लो भैया, ऐसे ही ले लो, दे दो ना से। फिर मैं नीचे ही आती हूँ, चल ना आप भी खड़े हो।
आप सब आगे आ जाओ, पीछे से आगे आ जाओ।
room.
ये सब पैक कर लेना, ड्राई फ्रूट रहने दो, मैं ले जाऊंगा।